This
So this is
conference
a
will
great
now
opportunity.
be recorded.
Sorry,
Got to
Tom.
remember to push that button. So this is a great opportunity for other people to be able to chime in. And if you miss this opportunity, for instance, in your conversations with other people, just because they were not in this meeting does not mean they cannot participate, because Anna is going to be talking about a little later about how some of those people can catch up and still participate. So I thank you for your time, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this back over to Anna to introduce her team and to go ahead and get us started. Anna?
Great. Thanks, Tom. So again, my name is Anna Vanderswag. I am an associate planner with Burton Planning Services. And Clinton County has selected our team to update the hazard mitigation plan for the county. So I'm here. I do a lot of the public involvement and preparation of the plan. And I also, I'll take any of your questions that you or additional comments that you feel like sending me after the meeting and help compile those. So I'll turn it over to my colleagues to introduce themselves as well. I have Brett and Rushi on the call.
My name is Brett Morris. I'm an associate planner with Burton Planning Services, and I am writing the mitigation actions for the plan. I'm doing the mapping and flood modeling for the plan, and I'm also helping Anna with plan preparation.
Hi, I'm Ruchi Agarwal. I am an associate planner with Burton Planning Services. I am assisting with public involvement activities. Thank you for joining us.
Great. So I see we have maybe about 4 or 5 other people on the call. Because there's just a few of us, I was wondering if each of you can just unmute yourself, introduce who you are, who you're representing on the call, or if you're a member of the public, where in the county you live. So I'll just let it open for the next few minutes. Just feel free to unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Gary Stockton. I am with Polaris in Wilmington, Ohio, and I am an EHS specialist, so I take care of the health, environmental, and safety over at our distribution center there in Wilmington.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
My name is Greg Kepner. I'm the Marion Township trustee, the board president, and we're down in the Blanchester area, Lower Clinton County, and we're glad to be on the call.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Julie Walters. I'm with Duke Energy out of Plainfield, Indiana, but we have a number of substations in Clinton County, and I'm really excited to help out any way that we can.
Thank you.
This is Megan Curry. I'm with Alkermes in Wilmington, Ohio, the pharmaceutical manufacturer, and I'm the senior EHS specialist at that facility.
Great, thanks for joining us.
EMA Office Assistant, Assistant to Director Tom Breckel.
Great. I don't know if you all could hear Misty. Misty is on the line. She is the assistant in the EMA office there in Clinton County. So there's a small group of us tonight, but I'm really hoping that that can help us, facilitate an interesting dialogue. I welcome this to be as much of a conversation as you guys want it to be. So if you have some things to chime in, feel free to just unmute yourself. Because it's such a small group, I've got a few things to say here at the beginning. But again, you can either ask questions by unmuting yourself. If you've called in, you can push *6 to unmute yourself, or you can type any questions you have in the chat. My colleagues will be monitoring the chat, so they might be able to answer your questions directly, or if there's something that seems appropriate to discuss as a group, we can do that as well. So a little bit more housekeeping related to having a virtual meeting. We thank you all for attending and taking the time to navigate the virtual format as we're getting more accustomed to this kind of way of meeting these days. But as I said before, I think we've got everyone signed in at this point. If more people join, I might make that announcement again. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to type those in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. And I'll show you here, we also have a link to the website, which is burtonplanning.com/Clinton-HMP. And my colleague will post that in the chat box as well if you want to go directly to the website. But I'll give you a little bit of a demonstration of what we have here. So on this webpage, we have lots of information about the plan, starting with an overview of the planning process, as well as the previous plan, which was completed in 2016. We have both meeting dates and times listed here. Today is the second of 2 meetings. All of the meeting materials from meeting 1 are on the website. So if you were unable to attend that previous meeting, you can go here, or if you have colleagues that you'd like to refer to some of these materials, you can send them here as well. There are links to both meetings. There was a 2:30 meeting and a 5:30 meeting back on June 24th. And so those can help guide you through the surveys. There were 3 surveys that were completed at that first meeting. So if you have not filled those out, we welcome additional surveys throughout this entire planning process. It's never too late to submit a survey. So we welcome everyone who wants to complete the survey. So again, if you have colleagues that you'd like to refer to this as well, that would be great. So again, the website up here, burtonplanning.com/Clinton-HMP, has all of the surveys. It also has the agenda, presentation, and surveys from today. There's a printable version of the survey that you can download, complete by hand, and email or fax it back to the county, or use regular mail as well. We have a fillable version which you can download and complete using Adobe and email that to the county. And there's also a link to a SurveyMonkey version online. So there are multiple versions. We'll get to that survey a little bit later. And if you have any questions about how to access that, just let us know. All right, so I'll jump back into the presentation. I think we've had a couple people join us since the beginning. If you're joining, we do recommend that you sign in. You can just put your name, email, phone number, and who you're representing into the chat box. That would be great. So in general, we're here today to work on updating the 2016 Clinton County Hazard Mitigation Plan. So I'll take you through an overview of hazard mitigation. If you were at the first meeting back in June, this will seem like a bit of an reiteration of what we went over then, but I'm just trying to refresh your brain ahead of the survey that we do today. I'll give you an update on the status of the plan, and then we'll spend some of the time gathering your input, so that way, we can really target this plan to your community's needs. Okay, so we'll start with an overview of hazard mitigation. Hazard mitigation is a sustained action to reduce or eliminate long-term risk associated with loss of human life and risk to property that are associated with hazard events. The goals of this planning process are to reduce potential losses from future disaster, to identify natural hazards, and identify actions or projects that can be implemented to reduce loss. And our final goal is to establish a process to implement these actions. So today, we've identified a lot of these actions and projects already, and we'll be looking to you to help us create an implementation plan for these projects. You might wonder what types of hazards can be included in this plan. You have hazards such as the water-based hazards, things like flooding and dam or levee failure. You have your wind-based hazards that include things like hurricanes, tornadoes, and damaging winds. There are both severe summer storms and severe winter storms that can impact the county. And then you have the hazards that are a result of a lack of water, such as drought and wildfires, and extreme heat can also be associated with those. You have the geology-based hazards that include landslides and earthquakes. Invasive species is often a hazard that people like to include because it can impact the county at different levels, economically speaking. And then you have your human-caused hazards, such as hazardous materials and terrorism events. So this slide shows an overview of the disaster response cycle. The first step here is mitigation, and that's what we're doing today. This occurs well before a disaster takes place. This is when a hazard mitigation plan comes into play. The second step is preparedness. This is when a disaster is imminent. And in this case, this is when an emergency operations plan will come into play. The third step in the disaster response cycle is when a disaster is actively occurring or taking place. And this is when a short-term emergency aid and assistance is needed. And then finally, you have the recovery, the post-disaster, the disaster recovery plan. So that's kind of the 4 steps. It is also significant. You can note that some of these happen at the same time. So if you're thinking about epidemic or pandemic as a hazard that we're experiencing now in terms of COVID-19, you know, we can be discussing it here today as a part of our mitigation planning and development of the hazard mitigation plan, but it's also actively occurring at the same time. So we're taking a lot of what we're actively learning from the current disaster at play and using it to guide our planning process and prevent such a worst case scenario from happening again in the future. So there's a legal framework that surrounds hazard mitigation planning and kind of defines the requirements for the process. The first is the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act. And this was passed in 1988. This is what says presidential disaster declarations can trigger federal assistance through FEMA. And then the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000 forms the legal basis for FEMA requiring state, local, and tribal mitigation plans. So this is what says that jurisdictions must have an adopted plan in order to receive funds from FEMA for certain types of non-emergency disaster assistance programs and projects. So you're looking here for receiving funds for projects that can reduce risk associated with hazards. A little bit more specifically, in order to receive FEMA funding for these projects, hazard mitigation plans must be adopted by local jurisdictions and updated every 5 years. Hazard mitigation plans must include several different sections to the report, including documentation of public participation, existing conditions and demographics assessment. The plan must also include any major disaster declarations that have occurred since the previous plan. It also include a risk assessment and vulnerability analysis for each hazard that is included in the plan, as well as specific projects that we refer to as mitigation actions. There are a variety of types of funding opportunities and types of projects that can potentially receive federal funding if they are included in the plan. So you have projects like property acquisition, demolition and relocation, property reconstruction, structure elevation, flood proofing and retrofitting. Things like you might be able to receive funds for purchasing generators or installing safe rooms or soil stabilization projects. That's just kind of a few examples. We'll get into a full list of all of the projects that are being recommended to include in the plan, and you will get an opportunity to provide your feedback on if you think it's an appropriate action for your community or for the county as a whole. So there are lots of benefits to hazard mitigation planning. The first is that the planning process ultimately helps minimize property damage, economic loss, injuries, and loss of human life. The second is that it can enhance public awareness and education of natural and human-caused hazards. It can also help coordinate interjurisdictional preparedness measures, including mitigation actions, projects, and programs for efficient and effective implementation. This process also provides tools for decision makers to better prepare for disasters, and it helps the county achieve state and federal regulatory compliance in order to remain eligible for funding. Municipalities can receive funds for building and infrastructure needs, such as addressing issues caused by hazards or improvements to reduce future issues that might be caused by hazards in the future. Police and fire departments, as well as schools, can receive funds for safety-related equipment and resources. Businesses, by participating, might be able to reduce or eliminate site and operational impacts from hazards. And in general, the public can use this process. It can, inform them and help reduce or eliminate monetary and emotional costs that will ultimately come from these hazard events in the form of lost lives or lost homes. So that is our summary of hazard mitigation planning. Does anyone have any questions on that? Feel free to unmute yourself. If you called in, you can push *6 to unmute yourself if you have any questions, or feel free to post your questions in the chat. All right, well then I'll keep going with an overview of the process and schedule specific to the Clinton County Hazard Mitigation Plan. So this slide shows a list of completed and upcoming tasks involved in the planning process. So far we've completed things like gathering a list of critical facilities, gathering a list of repetitive lost properties in the county. We've summarized features and demographics of the county and its jurisdictions. We've also gathered historical information on hazard events that have occurred in the county's history. And we've also gathered GIS base mapping data. In this process, this has included identifying past and potential hazards to evaluate in the plan. And we've also identified mitigation actions from the previous plan that need to can be included in this plan going forward as well. And then we've developed a list of new projects that may be included if you want. And that's ultimately today what we're looking to do is get some of your feedback on if these actions are relevant to your community. So there are 8 milestones associated with the process. Today we are completing milestone 4 by holding the second set of planning meetings. There was a stakeholder meeting at 2:30 And there's also this meeting at 5:30. The content is the same for both. So don't feel like if you couldn't make it to the first one, you're missing out. It's great that you're able to make it. But this is the second, so this is the last public meeting that we will be holding as part of this, but we will seek your input on the draft plan around November. So going forward, we'll prepare the draft plan over the next couple months and then send it out for the public, the EMA, key stakeholders, for all of you to review it. So that way we can send it to the state and federal emergency management agencies to get it approved. After it's approved by FEMA, each jurisdiction as well as the county will need to adopt the plan. So this is a more visual representation of the schedule. Here we're in early August. The next couple months, September, October, we will be drafting the plan, finalizing it based on your feedback that we get from you today. And then in November, that's when we aim to have it out for all of you to review. In December and January, we will be sending the plan out for review by the Ohio EMA and or FEMA. And then hopefully early next year, all the jurisdictions in the county can adopt the plan, and you'll have an adopted plan by February. All right, so getting more into your role as both stakeholders and members of the public. You are here to help provide local knowledge and data as needed. And you have, the local knowledge of, you've experienced the hazards in your county and your jurisdiction. You know how they impact your community. And so we really turn to you for helping us prioritize which hazards impact your county the worst, which ones don't pose the greatest threat to your community. And also, we'll turn to you to provide feedback on which projects you want to see included, and also provide feedback on the plan. So that is basically a summary of the planning process and hazard mitigation planning going forward. In this presentation, I'll review some survey results from the first meeting, and then we'll collect one more survey from you and collect any general feedback that you may have as well. So this is my little reminder that I stick through the presentation to remind anyone who has not signed in yet to please do so, either by clicking the SurveyMonkey link that is in the chat, or just by putting your name and who you're representing into the chat as well. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to just unmute yourself or post them in the chat. My colleagues are ready and willing to answer any questions you have there. So, all right, so we'll jump into a summary of the survey that we took at the last meeting. This is the hazard priority survey. If you were unable to attend the previous meeting or haven't completed this survey yet, we welcome you to do so. The QR code in the top right corner takes you directly to the SurveyMonkey version of the survey. You can also go straight to the project website, the burtonplanning.com/Clinton-HMP. But this survey asked every respondent to rate each hazard on a scale of 0 to 5, with 0 meaning that that hazard poses no threat to your county at all, and it doesn't need to be included in the plan, to 5 being that that hazard poses the greatest threat to your community, both in terms of frequency and total damage associated with it. So those survey results indicated that the top 3 hazards of concern were severe wind and tornadoes, epidemic and pandemic, and utility failure. The 3 hazards of least concern were landslides, erosion, and mine subsidence, as well as wildfire and earthquakes. One hazard that was brought up at the previous meeting was the potential to include drug misuse and addiction as part of this plan. And so we have opted to include that as a hazard because the county has deemed it, you know, multiple jurisdictions have brought it up as an issue. And so if, the drug misuse and addiction was not actually included in the previous survey. It was added afterwards. So we are requesting that each of you, if you are in the GoToMeeting platform, if you could use the chat box to just put a score of 0 to 5 for the hazard of drug misuse and addiction, just so that that can help us prioritize that compared to other hazards. So again, a score of 0 would mean that that hazard poses no threat to your community, that drug misuse and addiction poses no threat to your community, whereas a score of 5 would mean that that drug misuse and addiction poses the greatest threat to your community. And so we're looking from a score of 0 to 5. And it looks like we've got a score. Almost everyone. So you can think about it. If you just called in, that's fine. If you want to either text it to me, my phone number will be up here in a little bit again, or you can email the county afterwards as well. Are there any questions or surprises from this list of hazards? I guess I'll emphasize that the rankings are showed on the right-hand column. Things like flooding and terrorism and extreme temperatures kind of fell in the middle. Dam failure was also towards the end. Yeah. We can come back to that later if you have questions as well. But that is the end of the presentation side of things. We'll be moving into a survey. So if you have any specific questions about anything that I covered, feel free to let us know.
Excuse me, Anna?
Yeah.
Hi, Mayor Carmen. I had a question pertaining to the survey. One of the department heads had received a survey and they tried to go in and take that survey. They were told, it came up and said it was already closed and tallied. And I thought you said earlier that it was still accessible to be filled out. Is that correct? Or am I?
It definitely should be. So I will go in there as soon as this meeting is done and make sure that they're open, because that is a problem if they're not. So thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Sure.
Yeah, I will verify that. My apologies. Mayor, which jurisdiction do you represent?
Blanchester.
Great. Well, thank you for taking the time to join us this evening.
Thank you.
All right. So we'll jump into this version of the survey. Do you know, I guess, sorry to backtrack here, which survey they were having? Was it the recently distributed survey, or was it one of the surveys from the first meeting? Do you know?
Honestly, I didn't know there were multiple surveys. I know I received one on the drug use, but I'm not 100% sure. So
okay.
If you just received it within probably the last week, so if there was
Okay.
a previous survey, that might be the one.
All right. Well, Brett put the current link to this specific survey in the chat box if you all want to use the online version, or again, you can go to the project website here to either access one of the downloadable versions if you prefer to complete it either on your computer or by hand. I will be bringing up the fillable survey version here on my computer for us to look at together. If you need some assistance in getting to the surveys, or if you'd like us to send them in an email to you directly again, please just let us know in the chat. We'd be happy to follow up to make sure that you have access to this survey. Okay, so the mitigation action scoring matrix is the survey. It's kind of a lengthy title for basically the purpose of this survey is to determine which mitigation actions or projects are relevant to each of your communities and take that feedback to help develop a corresponding action plan that describes how the mitigation actions will be implemented. So scores collected from this survey will be used to decide how the mitigation actions will be prioritized, administered, and incorporated into the county's existing planning mechanisms. So we have some instructions for you to follow as you're completing this survey. So please review each proposed project. It is, I'll warn you, a lengthy list. However, it is important to review each one. Not all of them will be applicable to your jurisdiction necessarily or your organization, and that's okay. If it's not applicable, you can just simply mark no, and you don't have to continue on with that project. This is an expansive list of all possible projects that you can implement in your community. So again, not every project will be applicable, but we're providing you an opportunity to say that it is. So for each project listed, you'll first indicate if it's applicable to your jurisdiction. So there's a drop-down menu that says yes or no. Then we ask you to rate it on a series of categories that include cost effectiveness, feasibility, if it's environmentally sound, if it's needed immediately, and its total risk reduction. So in all of these, if you rate it, a 1 is the lowest possible score you can give it, a 5 is the highest possible score, and if you're neutral, really not sure, then you can mark it as a 3. So for cost effectiveness, this one tends to trip people up a little bit. They flip it around in their mind. But if you mark it as a 5, that means that it's the most affordable project, that it's pretty easy in terms of cost, easy on the budget. If you would rate it as a 1, that it means it's the most expensive and cost might be a barrier to implementing it. Then we ask you to consider the feasibility of the project. A 5 means that it's the most feasible, and a 1 means it's the least feasible. We then ask you to consider how it impacts the environment. If it's environmentally sound, you would mark it as a 5 if it does not impact the environment at all. If it has either positive effects on the environment or a neutral, has no impact on the environment. If it significantly has a negative impact on the environment, you would mark it as a 1. Then in terms of immediate need, if it was needed, if it's needed ASAP, if it should have been done 2 years ago, then we ask you to mark it as a 5. If it's not really needed in the near future, if it can be done in a couple years down the road, then you would mark it as a 1. Then finally, we ask you to consider how much it contributes to total risk reduction from the associated hazard. So 5 means it contributes significantly to reducing risk, and 1 means that it doesn't contribute hardly anything to reducing risk. So that's a lot to consider. We'll go through the first one as an example, and then I'll turn it over to you to kind of go through it and ask any questions that might pop up for you. Basically, we give you as much time as you need to go through it. So yeah, let's go through the first one as an example. I guess I'll say, in addition to the way I've described it, we will tally all of these up for a total score out of 25. And basically, the higher the score out of 25, the higher it will be prioritized on the list. If it has a score of 5 out of 25, it'll be a lot lower on the priority list. So any comments that you can include in the survey as well will be useful. So we'll go ahead and show you that example. I have some comments in here from the first meeting, sorry about that. So the first thing that I want to make sure that you all do is put your name and either your organization or jurisdiction up at the top. That's really important for us to be able to, if we have any questions, to follow up, it's really important that we have your name. Okay, so this is what the survey looks like. And this first project here falls under the category of multiple hazards. So it's applicable to a variety of different hazards. And then as we go down, it then further separates it based on hazards such as dam failure or drought. And the new or previous column indicates if it was included in the previous plan or not. So new means that has been added based on either the first meeting that from back in June or additional research or feedback. So we'll jump right in and just I'll read number 1 as an example, and we can go through the process of considering and rating each one. So the first one is collaborate with public and private sector interests to obtain or create information regarding disaster preparedness, recovery assistance, and other post-disaster strategies for citizens and businesses. So you can consider this both at a jurisdictional level or at a county level. Earlier we said that yes, it was applicable to the county, and I'll turn it over to Tom to kind of describe why he said that, as well as how he thought through each of the ratings.
All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reapproach this question. And when I do this, I want you to kind of act like you're asking yourself the same type of question, because your answer is not gonna be the same as my answer. And remember, this is all about your opinions. So when we talk about collaborate with public and private sector interests on getting information regarding disaster preparedness, we're talking about reaching out to organizations like whether it's FEMA, the American Red Cross, or whatever. So is this something that is cost effective? From my standpoint, I would say yes, because a lot of that stuff is pre-existing. For instance, on the American Red Cross, they actually have a business program now that's kind of like Mad Libs. If you ever recall riding in a car for long distances and you had to pull out that little sheet of paper where you had to come up with a noun and adverb and all that stuff, and it comes up with some sort of wacky sentence or a story on something. Well, that is essentially how they put together a plan, and you can do it online. So from this standpoint, if I were to leverage the American Red Cross with that capability and integrate it in with my new website design for the county EMA, how cost effective would that be? Would it be 5, very cost effective, or 1, extremely expensive? From my standpoint, I would say it's probably be a 4 or a 5, because a lot of times it's going to be at no cost and they want to get the word out. Is it technically feasible? all right, I'm not a web designer, but I'm sure I can find some people that can make that happen. Or a lot of times it's just merely just putting a link out there. So once again, I'm going to say it's highly technically feasible. Is it environmentally sound? Well, it's ones and zeros. So unless someone is always hitting Control P and printing off lots of paper and murdering a bunch of trees from the Amazon because they can't wait to get everything done before they hit print, I would say yes, it is extremely environmentally sound. Is there an immediate need? Well, this is where it comes up to your personal opinion. I think that for the most part, most members of the county are underprepared. Some people would beg to differ. Some people would say, why do I need to prepare? Because someone else is always going to be there for me. So I would probably say it's going to be about maybe a 3 or a 4. Now, risk reduction. This is where it gets really kind of dicey on this, because for this to work, this actually requires someone else to do something. So in the comments, I'm going to put down here requires action from the user or someone else. And I would probably put this maybe about a 3, kind of middle of the road. And that is how I would approach that first one. And it's purely from my point of view. And as people from various different municipalities and various different rules of life, that's really how you need to answer it. It's not how what Tom Breckle would see it. It's not how Anna would see it. It's how do you see it as it applies to you, either as your business is located in the county or if you reside in the county. So hopefully that helps. Anna?
Perfect. That explanation is extremely helpful. Does anyone have any questions beyond that we can address in terms of what you should consider as you're rating these things? I'll reiterate what Tom said in terms of it being completely from your perspective. That's what, we compile all of the different perspectives in order to give us a plan that really matches what your community needs. And so it's going to be different for every jurisdiction, every municipality, and even by departments within the county. And so it's important that you complete this, with your personal perspective in mind. And so what I'll do now is, kind of give you some time to get started and take a look at it, see what might be applicable to you, your organization. I know we have a few private sector stakeholders on the line, which is great to have you here. You might not find all of these applicable to your area of expertise, and that is okay. Don't feel you can completely say no. It's okay to say no, that these aren't applicable. You can also add to the comments if you feel uncomfortable rating it because you're not quite sure. We are just looking for you to complete this to the best of your ability. So with that being said, I'll give you a few minutes to kind of get going and kind of see if you have any initial questions, and then we will just be here in a support role for you as you start the survey. So with that, I'll stop talking for a few minutes, and I'll check back in and see if you have any questions in just a few minutes. Thanks. Okay, so now that you've had some time to start getting into it yourself, is it making sense? Do you have any questions? Yes, and Brett says you can also ask questions in the chat as you're going. That works just as well. So I'll go ahead and keep muting myself, but feel free to jump right in and ask any questions. Okay, so I did just want to verify. I went in and checked all the surveys on our end are showing that they are still open on SurveyMonkey. So if your colleague still continues to have issues accessing the survey, we'd recommend just sending us a screenshot of the error he's getting. That way we can troubleshoot a little bit better. They're all showing that they're open, and we've had people fill them out today. So feel free to follow up with us directly by phone or email after the meeting. Are there any other questions about the survey as you all are filling it out? Yes, Megan, I completely understand. You can absolutely finish the survey after the meeting. We would like all survey responses in by August 21st at the absolute latest. And we'll be following up with jurisdictions to request that all surveys are completed by each jurisdiction. Let me go ahead and just kind of give you my end spiel here. This slide has our contact information, so feel free to reach out to me directly by phone or email if you want to follow up after the meeting. The project website also has specific instructions on how you can submit your surveys either by email or by regular mail, as well as I believe there's a fax number on the website, I think. So feel free to submit those, in the varying ways that you've completed the survey. If there are any other questions, we will stick around for the next few minutes to kind of guide you through the process. Otherwise, you are free to go kind of as you need to. But if you want to stick around and complete the survey now, we'll stick around with you. So it's completely up to you. Thank you so much to all of you who took the time to join us this evening. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Appreciate it. Tom, appreciate it. Thanks very much. This is Greg Hefner. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a good evening.
You too.
I have a question for Tom, if he's still available. Mayor Carmen.
Certainly, Mayor. Certainly, Mayor. Go ahead.
So on some of these questions on the survey pertaining to the fire department, since we have a township fire department, joint fire department, and we have our own utilities, so the question dealing with the dam, I would probably put NA. That's probably something they would be better answered by, those authorities. Would you agree, or do you want some response?
If you're doing the online survey, it may require you to put something in. So if you weren't sure what it was, I'm just going to give this recommendation, and Anna, you can come back and either concur or non-concur or wave the BS flag. I would just put threes right down the row and then put a comment on there saying, I defer this to, and just put the person's name, and then just make sure that they go through and they do the survey, and then that way we can capture their response.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Did that help you out, sir?
Yep, I would agree with you, Tom, on that. All right, well, Tom, I think everyone has left. Do you have any questions for us? I'm sure I'll be in touch just with a follow-up email tomorrow to kind of summarize everything and our plans going forward, but any specific questions at the moment?
Not at this time. That sounds like a plan. I say we go ahead and call it a night.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I just want to say your description and helpfulness in kind of going through each of those ratings is exactly what I want every EMA director to do when we're completing this survey. It's so helpful, and oftentimes people are doing other things, which I understand, but it's so helpful when you give us your perspective on that. So thank you.
Well, just coach them and say, hey, can you do this and deliver this to enable someone to do X? The worst I can say is, no, I pay you money, that's your job. And then you're like, okay, we'll just cast a check and there we go.
Sounds good. All right. Well,
All right.
I'll be in touch tomorrow.
All right, you guys have a wonderful evening. Stay safe. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.